I came home early that Tuesday, not because I planned to, but because the client meeting got canceled last minute, and for once I decided to take the quiet hour for myself. The house was still. No TV, no sound of running water, not even her usual Spotify playlist humming softly from the kitchen speaker. At first, I thought she hadn't returned yet from her work trip, the one she said was supposed to end today. But then I saw it. A cup in the sink. Her favorite one. White porcelain, faint crack down the handle, the one I glued back together after our daughter knocked it over last year. It was stained with what looked like tea, still slightly warm. My mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe she came home early too. Maybe she forgot to text. But I knew her. She never left that cup in the sink. She was obsessive about that kind of thing. I stood there longer than necessary, just staring at the cup, the faint ring at the bottom of the porcelain, the way it tilted slightly on the metal grid. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was the cold, low click of a lock turning in my gut. Something had shifted. I didn't even take off my shoes before walking through the hall. That's when I saw them. A pair of men's shoes. Not mine. Not anyone's I knew. Dark brown, polished, size maybe 44 or 45. They were lined up neatly by the wall, neatly, like someone who intended to stay, who wanted to make a good impression. My jaw tightened, but still, no emotion. Just calculation. I turned and glanced up the staircase. The door to our bedroom was half shut. I didn't go up. Not because I was afraid of what I'd find. Because I already knew. It wasn't even about evidence anymore. It was a sensation, like a thread pulled too tight. Like I had slipped through the surface of my life and was now standing underneath it, watching the cracks from the other side. I left the house. Quietly. Got back into the car and drove to the nearest petrol station. Sat in the parking lot for nearly 20 minutes. I didn't call her. I didn't storm back in. I just stared through the windshield at the world going on like nothing was happening. I could hear the engine hum, that little vibration in the steering wheel. Outside, a teenager walked past holding 2 Monster cans and a bag of crisps. He was laughing into his phone. I wasn't really watching him. I was watching the life I used to be in, just minutes ago, dissolve into something I didn't recognize. When I came home 2 hours later, the shoes were gone. So was the warmth in the cup. She was sitting on the couch with her laptop open and a blanket over her legs like nothing had happened. She smiled when she saw me, said, "Hey, you're home early," and I noticed a scratch on her shoulder. Not deep, but red and fresh. It ran diagonally, just beneath the strap of her tank top. I stared at it too long. She noticed. "Cat at the hotel," she said, brushing it off, literally, like it was dust. Stray jumped on me when I was coming back from dinner. I nodded. "Hope you got your shots." She laughed a little, but her eyes were reading me, trying to see if I had questions, if I was suspicious. I gave her nothing. That night, she kissed me like she hadn't just fucked someone else in our bed. Her lips were careful, practiced. Her hand slid across my chest with mechanical softness. I didn't stop her, but I didn't respond either. I lay there, still as stone, until she eventually rolled over and pretended to sleep. I stared at the ceiling for 3 hours, not thinking, planning. The next day, I pretended everything was fine. Kissed her on the forehead, made her coffee, even asked how the trip went. She smiled through her teeth and talked about meetings that never happened, cities she never visited. She was building a fiction, brick by brick, and thought I was buying it. I wasn't. I was memorizing every detail, every lie, every flaw in the delivery. Like watching an actor forget their lines but try to fake through the scene. I checked her phone that night. She left it on the nightstand while she showered. Normally she never does. But that night she was careless. Or maybe just arrogant. There were no messages under obvious names. But then I saw one. Andre Yoga. It was an odd contact. We both used to go to yoga years ago, before the kid, before the schedules, before the life settled into something more routine. I opened the thread. There were only a few messages, recently deleted, but one was missed. "Last night was insane. You left this on my nightstand black card." No photo, no context, just enough. Just a shard of a blade pressing into the center of my mind. That's when the cold really settled in. It wasn't shock anymore. It was clarity, like the moment before a sniper pulls the trigger. No rage, no shouting, just focus. Because I knew exactly what was coming up in 2 weeks. Our daughter's birthday, a garden party, families, friends, her parents, her friends, my friends, even some of her coworkers. And I knew what I was going to do. It was going to be the last happy memory she'd ever have in that house. Everything seemed fine on the surface. That's the part that still sticks with me. How normal it all felt. The way we still ate dinner together most nights, how she kissed our daughter goodnight, how she laughed at stupid sitcom reruns on Netflix while wrapped in the same blanket we picked out together from IKEA 4 years ago. I'd come home, the lights would be on, the house smelled like dinner or candles or the faint citrus of her diffuser. For a while, I actually believed I could be wrong, that maybe I imagined it, that maybe the scratch, the shoes, the message from Andre Yoga were just coincidences. The brain will do that. It'll try to protect you, try to smother the scream with silence. But cracks don't stay hidden. They spread. She became more polished. That was the first shift. Suddenly, she was going to the gym again, even early mornings before work. Bought new leggings, new running shoes. She started wearing perfume again, something floral and sharp. I noticed it one evening when she came back from what she claimed was a girls' night. She said they went to a bar in the center. She seemed flushed, laughing too loudly, too free. Not drunk or alive. I reached over to take her coat, and she pulled away like I was a stranger on the street. I smiled and didn't say a word. But when I went to the car the next day to get our daughter's forgotten backpack, I opened the trunk. There was a sleek black paper bag inside. One of those boutique stores she never shops at. Inside, a small box of condoms. Not opened, but definitely not bought by accident. We hadn't used those in years. I left the bag exactly where I found it. The next morning, she was chipper. Made pancakes, kissed me on the cheek, called me babe in that automatic way. I stared at her as she wiped syrup off our daughter's chin. Her hair still slightly damp from the shower, her skin glowing from the gym. She looked like the perfect mom, the perfect wife. But I saw the outline of the bag again when she opened the trunk to grab groceries later that day. I watched from the kitchen window. Her smile didn't flicker. Then there were the purchases. The bank statements started raising questions she never answered. Expensive lingerie, designer heels, spa treatments, meals at places we'd never been together. I'd ask casually, new dress, and she'd shrug. Oh, just something I got on sale. I'd say, you looked great in that pic from the other night. And she'd hesitate, smile too tightly. Oh yeah, weird lighting though. I almost didn't post it. But what she didn't know was that I saw less and less of her online. Her Instagram used to be open. Now, it was locked down. Posts went up, but I couldn't see them. Stories too. Blocked from her feed. Slowly pushed out of the version of her life that she wanted to curate for someone else. We stopped having sex. No big fight. No conversation. Just a gradual fade, like a song being turned down until it disappears. When I'd try to touch her, she'd say she was tired. When I kissed her neck, she'd wince. One night I asked if everything was okay. She took a long breath, didn't look at me, and said, I'm just trying to figure myself out. You know? I need some time to just be alone sometimes. That same night, she went out again. Claimed she was going to a movie with a coworker. She didn't come back until 1:30. I was still awake. She didn't apologize for the time. She didn't even pretend to care that our daughter asked for her 3 times that evening. She had this new group of friends. People I never met. Old college girls, she said. We reconnected. I asked for names. She brushed it off. I started to notice how she never answered her phone around me anymore. And when she did, it was always just work, or Anna, or ugh, just my mom again. But the messages never popped up. No sound. No previews. I checked her phone once more, just once. Nothing. Either she was deleting everything religiously or had another app. Either way, the effort was there. The deception was deliberate. One day, our daughter came home from preschool and said, Mommy says she's going to be a new person soon. I asked what that meant. She shrugged. She said she's going to be happier. That sometimes people change. I smiled, nodded, and gave her a snack. But inside, something cracked. Not from sadness. From recognition. Because cheaters always believe they're transforming. That they're awakening into someone better. But it's just wrought under a fresh coat of paint. Still, I played my part. I asked her about her day. I cooked dinner. I massaged her feet when she complained about work. And all the while, I studied her. Every movement. Every pattern. I wasn't hurt anymore. I wasn't confused. I was preparing. The party was coming up. Invitations had been sent. The bouncy castle was booked. Our backyard was going to be filled with balloons and music and smiling families. She was in full planning mode, baking Pinterest boards, shopping for decorations, obsessing over party favors. Her mask was flawless, but I could already see the moment it would all fall apart. And she had no idea I was the one holding the knife. It was a Saturday morning when the illusion finally shattered. Not like a plate smashing on the ground, no. It was more like a hairline fracture in a mirror that suddenly spiderwebs across the whole surface. We were getting ready to take our daughter to her swimming lesson, and she came downstairs in a tight black hoodie and jeans, her hair pulled back, face barely done. She smelled different. Not bad. Just not like her. Not like the perfume she always wore around me, fresh citrus with something floral under it. This one was muskier. A deeper scent, sultry, foreign. Something you wear for someone who sees you undressed. She said it was a sample from a magazine she liked. I smiled, said it suited her. Inside, I made a mental note. Scent changed. After the class, we stopped for brunch. She was distant, phone in her hand the whole time, face lit by the glow of the screen. She laughed once, suddenly, out of nowhere. I asked what was funny. She blinked like she forgot I was there, then said, "Oh, just a meme Anna sent me." I said nothing. Just sipped my coffee, watching how fast her fingers flew across the screen. Like muscle memory. Like texting someone she couldn't wait to reply to. That night, when she thought I was asleep, I heard her phone vibrate. She picked it up and slipped out of the bedroom. No explanation. I waited. Listened. She went down the hall, then into the guest bathroom, the only one with a lock. I got out of bed barefoot, slow, quiet, like a hunter, and crept down the hallway. Pressed my ear to the door. Her voice was low, soft. I couldn't make out the words. Just the tone. That high-pitched whisper women only use when they're flirting. I didn't knock. I didn't burst in. I went back to bed and closed my eyes. She crawled in beside me 10 minutes later. Her skin was cold, but she pressed herself against my back like nothing happened. Like I wouldn't notice the shift in her body. Like I was a fool. The next day, I installed a location tracking app on her phone while she showered. She didn't notice. She was too busy playing the role of the woman trying to find herself. 2 days later, she told me she was going to a spa day with her girlfriends. She kissed me on the cheek, wore yoga pants and no makeup. Said they were going to disconnect, be present, no phones, no stress. But her phone wasn't off. I watched the little red dot move. Not to the spa. Not to the wellness center she mentioned. It stopped at a motel. Not even a nice one. Just a cheap roadside dump with curtains that never fully close and hourly rates. She stayed there for 2 hours and 43 minutes. Then drove home like nothing happened. That night, she came back smelling like eucalyptus. Said they had a steam ritual. I asked her if she got the deep tissue massage she'd booked. She paused, just a second too long, then said, "Yeah, it was intense." I nodded. Told her I was glad she was taking care of herself. She smiled, relieved I didn't press. But I wasn't done. I checked her social media that night. Scrolled through her posts. Nothing stood out until I checked the likes. There it was. A like on an old photo of her in a bikini from 2016. Not from a friend. Not from a woman. From a man. His name wasn't familiar. No mutuals. Just a profile picture of some guy at a gym. I clicked through. He wasn't subtle. Thirst traps, car selfies, motivational quotes with veiled sexual undertones. She liked several, and he had liked many of hers too, including recent selfies I never saw her take. That name. I remembered it. It wasn't Andre Yoga. It was the guy who commented once on one of her pictures years ago, back when we were first married. Stunning as always. She brushed it off then. Just an old classmate. But now, he was back. I waited 3 days. Watched the tracking app. Monitored her messages when she left her phone unattended. Nothing obvious until one night, our daughter fell asleep early and she went out on the porch to get some air. She took her phone with her. I followed a few minutes later, silent, stopping just behind the kitchen door. She was on a call. I heard her giggling. Then I heard this. "You always say the sweetest things." He said that to me yesterday too, but when you say it, it feels real. My breath didn't hitch. My heart didn't race. I stood there, a shadow in my own house, listening to her recycle my words for someone else. She was handing pieces of me to another man like they were hers to give. I walked back inside and poured a glass of water, my hands steady as stone. Later, when she came back in, I was sitting on the couch watching a movie. She kissed me on the head and said, "You should have come out. It's nice tonight." I looked up at her, smiled softly, and said, "Next time." She smiled back, pleased, comfortable. She had no idea. She didn't know I'd already printed the motel's address and receipt from her phone's cloud backup. She didn't know I was screenshotting her social media activity and saving every message, every like, every timestamp. She didn't know I'd found the man's LinkedIn profile, saw where he worked, who he was married to, what school his kids went to. She didn't know I'd written a script for what I'd say the moment I confronted her. No, not to her. To everyone else. Her parents. Our friends. Her colleagues. Our daughter's teachers. At the birthday party. Because the performance wasn't over yet. It was just reaching its climax. And she? She was still acting like she was the director. The moment I accepted the truth, my mind stopped being a victim. I became something else. A machine. A man operating behind glass. No emotion, no outbursts, just movements on a board only I could see. She wanted to play this like a secret. I would treat it like a war. My first step was simple. I ordered lunch, salad and pasta for delivery to her office on a Thursday afternoon. I picked the exact time she said she'd be there for meetings. The courier arrived and called me confused. "There's no one named her name working today," he said. "They said she's out until Monday." I told him to keep the food, thanked him, hung up, then stared at the wall for a long time, watching the narrative in my head burn and fall away. She wasn't at a meeting. She wasn't at work. She was somewhere else, telling someone else lies that cost her nothing until now. I didn't tell her. I kissed her goodnight that evening. Let her tell me how exhausting the team session was. How she might start applying for higher positions soon. "Growth," she said. "I'm finally prioritizing myself." I smiled, told her I was proud. Then I stayed up until 2 a.m. cross-checking our shared bank accounts. Her card showed weekly charges to a convenience store near the cheap motel. Same time, same day, same sequence. Spa story, then charge, then radio silence for 3 hours. Like she thought her lies were smooth, invisible. But I saw them now as bright red lines on a map. Her secret was becoming geographic. I didn't confront her. I did something better. I asked my old friend Anton, quiet guy, code monkey, the type who builds burner profiles for fun, to help me. He made a fake Instagram. Gym photos, book quotes, a believable trail of life. Then he followed her. Liked a few of her selfies. Within a week, she followed him back. Another week, she started responding to his DMs, light flirting at first. Then she told him she was in a complicated phase. That she wasn't looking but open to something real. I read those words in bed while she slept next to me. It wasn't jealousy that hit me. It was fascination. She was still acting like this was her story to write. She had no idea I was already editing the ending. The next move was deeper. I didn't follow her. I followed Anna, her supposed best friend, the one she always said she was with. I went through Anna's socials. Found nothing strange until I saw a tag. Anna was at a vineyard 2 weekends ago. Same weekend my wife said they were at a retreat. But she was tagged with 2 other women. No wife in sight. I kept digging. Through Anna's photos, I saw a man pop up a few times. Different events. Closed body language. Same guy from the old bikini photo likes. I found his profile private, but not airtight. His name matched the one I'd seen on our bank statement from a boutique wine shop. A shop she never mentioned, located right next to that same motel. She wasn't just cheating. She was recycling her life. Using my time, our child's memories, and our money to build a duplicate version of herself somewhere else. But that was fine, because now I had a name, a face, a timeline. I pulled his email from a charity donation page he forgot to scrub. Then I hacked into her laptop and added his email as a trusted device for shared docs. Set up auto-forwarding to a clean inbox. Everything she sent to him, I saw. Drafts, notes, plans, messages like, "I hate lying, but he's so oblivious," and "maybe 1 more month. I just need to be sure about us." She was scheduling me for disposal like I was a broken appliance. But I wasn't broken. I was awake. Then came the password test. I changed the Wi-Fi. Told her it was a security issue from our provider. Gave her a fake password first. She typed it in, failed, asked if I was sure. I said, "Try again. Maybe caps lock?" She smiled, did it again, failed, then looked annoyed. Not frustrated. Annoyed, like someone whose secret world had gone dark. She wasn't irritated about Wi-Fi. She was mad her link to him had been severed. I gave her the correct one 5 minutes later. She mumbled thanks and vanished into the bedroom. I stayed in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea I had no intention of drinking. I was patient, methodical. I started leaving small questions out like traps. You remember when we used to go to that park near your office? I'd say. Or, did Anna ever get that parking ticket resolved? She'd blink, stumble, recover, lie. It was effortless for her now. But it was like watching a magician repeat the same tired trick. I knew where the card was hidden. I didn't need to flip it over yet. Not yet. Her birthday was 2 days before our daughter's party. She asked if we could do something just us this year. She wanted a weekend away, but I told her I had a work conflict. She shrugged and said, maybe that's for the best. That's when I knew she had something planned. I told her to go. Enjoy yourself. Take time for your soul. Her eyes lit up, like a dog off a leash. She left Friday morning. I called the hotel she booked under a fake name. Got a copy of the invoice sent to our shared email. She paid cash, but they gave a receipt for her partner's dinner request. 2 guests, medium rare steak, Pinot Noir. I screenshotted everything, compiled it into a neat folder on a hidden drive, titled it Truth, because the party was coming. The guests were coming. The candles would be lit, the cake would be cut, and she'd think she was safe until that folder and everything inside it detonated in her hands. I picked the restaurant carefully, quiet, elegant, somewhere she'd feel safe. A place where the lighting was soft, the music low, and everything felt too refined for anything ugly to happen. I called it a belated birthday dinner. Told her I wanted to make up for being busy last weekend. She smiled, curious but pleased, asked if she should dress up. I said, wear the black one. The one you wore to our anniversary last year. She wore it. Of course she did. The same dress she once cried in after a toast I gave about forever. She walked into the restaurant 15 minutes late, all glowing skin and expensive perfume, hair curled. I searching. She spotted me and waved, then approached like a woman who still believed she was in control. I stood up, kissed her cheek, pulled out her chair. Everything was perfect. The waiter brought the wine. She raised her glass and smiled across the table. To new beginnings, she said. I tilted my head slightly. Sure, I replied. Let's drink to that. I let her talk first. About her day. Her new project at work. How liberating it felt to finally take charge of her life. She was radiant, her voice full of self-importance, her movements choreographed for effect. It was like watching a politician campaign for a second chance, except I wasn't voting. I was sentencing. When the main course came, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small USB drive. Placed it beside her plate like a mint. She stared at it, lips parting just slightly. What's that? She asked. I sipped my wine and answered, that's the truth. In high definition. She didn't touch it. Didn't breathe. Just stared. I leaned forward. You should recognize the hotel room. It's the one with the green curtains and broken wall lamp. The one you keep going back to every Thursday. Oh, and Friday last week. Happy birthday, by the way. Her face didn't fall right away. First came the confusion. Then the flicker of fear. Then she tried to gather herself, smile twisting like wet paper. Listen, she said, her voice low. This isn't what you think it is. I almost laughed. Not out of amusement, but out of how perfectly predictable she was. No, I asked, nodding. Because from what I saw, it looked like you were enjoying yourself. Quite a lot, actually. Especially during the part where you told him you couldn't wait to be done with me. She flinched, just slightly. Her mouth opened again, this time quicker. We were just talking. He helped me through some things. You wore the necklace I bought you while you fucked him, I said calmly. No anger. No edge. Just delivery. You moaned his name into the same pillow our daughter made you for Mother's Day. That's not just talking. That's choosing. She sat back, lips pressed tightly together, eyes darting around the restaurant. I could see her trying to calculate whether to deny, cry, deflect. She went for deflect. You weren't present, she said, voice sharper now. You were always working, always distracted. You never asked how I felt. I nodded. You're right, I said. I didn't ask? Because I thought I married a grown woman who could use her words instead of her body to fix a marriage. She froze. That was the first real wound. Then came the posture shift, the shoulder pull, the spine straightening. The defense. You don't understand how hard it was to feel invisible, she said. I needed to feel wanted again. And he gave me something you stopped giving me. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and looked at her the way a chess master looks at a board one move before checkmate. Attention from a stranger isn't love. It's validation for the desperate. And what he gave you, it wasn't value. It was access. You were easy, not special. That hit her. Her lips twitched. The color drained from her face, not from shame. No, she wasn't built for that, but from the sudden realization that she had lost control. Entirely. She looked down at the USB, fingers hovering above it like it burned. So what now? She asked, quieter than before. I smiled slightly. Now? Nothing. I stood, dropped a folded paper on the table. It was a copy of the guest list for our daughter's birthday, with a little asterisk beside one of the names, his wife. I leaned close to her, just enough so only she could hear. You should probably tell him before she does. She blinked fast. You wouldn't. I nodded. Already have. I gave her everything. Videos, screenshots, dates, times, even the receipt from the wine you shared while our daughter cried because you had to work late. I figured she deserved the truth too. Her mouth opened, then closed. No sound came. Her hands shook just slightly. I watched her reach for the USB with a trembling hand, clutch it like something sacred. But it was already over. Her world wasn't collapsing tomorrow. It was collapsing now. She just hadn't heard the full echo yet. I turned to leave. She didn't call after me. She didn't beg. Because in that moment, she wasn't the woman who had control, who had options. She was just the woman sitting in a restaurant, holding proof of her own destruction. And I was already gone. She started texting that same night. At first, it was simple. We need to talk. I didn't reply. Then came the calls. First 1, then 5, then 11. I didn't pick up. She sent a voice message, still composed, confident, a bit annoyed. I don't understand what that was. This was just an overreaction. Give me a chance to explain. Her words still carried power. She still believed she was holding the strings. I left the message unopened. The next day, she showed up at the house at 10 in the morning. I deliberately left the door unlocked. I knew she'd come. She walked in without taking off her coat, dropped her bag on the floor like she used to after yoga. But there was no smugness in her eyes anymore. Just anger, tangled with panic. You seriously blew up my life like that? Just like that? In front of everyone. Her voice cracked, but she kept her stance. I stood by the window, silent. She stepped closer. You went too far. Even if I made a mistake, that wasn't fair. I turned to face her slowly and met her eyes. Fairness died in the same motel where you screamed his name. She froze. For the first time, she had nothing. Then came the next mask, the victim. You smothered me, you know that? You controlled everything. I just needed to be myself. I needed to breathe. I nodded. So you opened your legs for the first guy who gave you 5 minutes of attention? She flinched, then snapped. You're not perfect either, okay? You think you always do everything right? You're boring. You're dull. Life with you is just routine, no spark, no excitement. Her voice rose, hands shaking. I didn't move, just stared. That silence broke her more than any scream could have, because it meant I didn't care anymore. She stormed into the kitchen, frantically grabbing her things. I'm taking my stuff, and I'm never coming back, she shouted. I replied calmly. I already moved your stuff yesterday. It's boxed up at your mother's house. She stopped, turned slowly, fear and fury in her eyes. You had no right, I cut her off. I have every right. The facts, the morality, the child. You have nothing but the consequences of your own choices. She went quiet. For the first time in all these days, truly silent. I watched something inside her crack, and I didn't feel pity. Just the deep, icy detachment of someone watching a structure collapse from a safe distance. She slumped onto the couch, hands on her head. I didn't want this. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't move. No, it happened exactly how you planned it. You just didn't think I'd be watching. She started crying. But those weren't tears of regret. Those were the tears of someone who failed, who thought they could live 2 lives and ended up with none. She kept mumbling things. About our daughter. About how we should talk. How it's not too late. I heard her, but I didn't listen. The connection between us was dead. I didn't see a woman I once loved. I saw a betrayal I had survived. And I didn't hate her. I didn't need to. I was just cold, calm. The smile of a man who won the game before the other player even knew it had started. I started executing the plan the very next day. No emotions, no second thoughts. Like a surgeon prepping for a complicated but necessary procedure. Every move had been mapped out in my mind for weeks, long before the dinner, long before the confrontation. While she was living between two realities, I was building a map, financial, legal, social. She thought she had two lives, the one with her family and the one in secret. But while she was choosing which mask to wear, I was sealing the exits to both. First, finances. I reviewed every shared account, traced all her suspicious purchases, copied every transaction history, hotel receipts, boutique invoices. I compiled them all into a folder titled Grounds for Divorce. Then came the joint account login. I changed the password, updated the recovery email, removed her number. She had no access. Nothing. Next, her car. It was under my name, registered as a gift, but the papers were in my safe. The next morning, I went to the insurance provider, canceled her coverage, filed a deregistration request. The car was towed from her work parking lot while she was sipping coffee with her colleague. I can only imagine her face. Lost, confused, blind to the fact this was just the beginning. Legally, I was prepared. Divorce on grounds of infidelity, backed by solid evidence I had been gathering for weeks. My lawyer already had a package, statements, footage, timelines, witness testimony. Everything was documented, every spa day, every hotel visit, every charge from her card, every screenshot from her secret messages. But I didn't stop at legal. I wanted her to be undone. Not just left, I wanted her exposed. I blocked her access to our shared Google Drive, revoked permissions to family photos, documents, even our shared calendar. She had no visibility into our life anymore. And the most important move, I took our daughter. Not emotionally, not recklessly, legally. I filed for temporary custody during the divorce process, citing her moral instability, infidelity, and ongoing deception. The court granted it. She came home one day, and we were gone. No toys, no books, no laughter. On the kitchen table, a court order. And a note. Our daughter doesn't need to watch you destroy everything. Then came the social blow. I didn't make a scene. I didn't throw her under the bus. I mailed a flash drive to her parents. No explanation, just evidence. Her mother called me in tears. Her father paused for a long moment, then said, "We didn't know who our daughter really was. Now we do." I also sent the same to her 3 closest friends, the ones who always posted girls' night selfies. Turns out, 2 of them were clueless. The third knew everything. Covered for her. I didn't confront her, I just ensured she got a copy too. And then I forwarded a clean version to her HR department. No threats, no drama. Just proof. Inappropriate behavior during work hours, potential policy violations. I didn't demand action. I just planted seeds. Doubt can be more lethal than accusation. I had prepared every step, every document, every conversation. Like a chessboard, every move forced a reaction, her position crumbling piece by piece. Not because I was bitter, but because she believed she could do this without consequences. That betrayal was just a phase. That I'd endure. That I'd stay quiet. But now she knows. I'm not the man you betray and walk away from. I'm the man who watches, waits, and dismantles, silently, completely. It all came together at our daughter's birthday party. The garden was filled with laughter, balloons, and the soft echo of children running through the grass. Tables lined with food, music humming from the speakers, folding chairs filled with parents from school, relatives, her coworkers, even her childhood best friend. She had planned it all, obsessing over every detail like this was her moment to shine. The perfect mother. The perfect wife. She wore a white summer dress and a fake glow, floating between conversations like a politician on campaign day. No one could tell the storm was about to hit, except me. Because every guest at that party had already seen the truth. I had sent it out 2 days before. A quiet drop. A shared folder with screenshots, audio, location data, timelines, photos. I didn't add any commentary, just titled it for context. It spread faster than I expected. Her father called me that same night and said only 5 words. Do what you have to. Her best friend messaged me at 2 a.m. Simply, I'm sorry. I didn't know. Even one of her coworkers, one I never met, forwarded it to their internal office group. I didn't ask them to. People just did what they felt was right. When truth hits like that, it doesn't need force. It spreads on its own. And she was walking into a crowd that already knew everything. She didn't notice at first. Still smiled. Still waved. Still held our daughter in her arms as the birthday song played. I stood by the grill, watching it all, calm, unmoved. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. This wasn't revenge, it was gravity. Her actions falling into place, finally crashing into the ground where they belonged. She came up to me, kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened, and whispered, "Thank you for making today happen." I looked her in the eye and said, "Don't thank me yet." She blinked, confused, but before she could ask, someone tapped her on the shoulder. Her best friend. Pale, lips pressed in a straight line. She handed my wife her phone. On the screen, opened to a message. Her face twisted, eyes darting across the lines. Then she looked at me. "You sent this." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her friend turned and walked away without another word. Then came the second hit. Her coworker, quiet guy in glasses, gave her the briefest of nods, then turned his back and walked toward the drinks. Two other parents she usually chatted with smiled tightly, then made a point to avoid her. The circle was closing. She tried to hold it together, straightened her back, smiled, picked up a paper plate, and offered cake like she was still the hostess of the year. But the whispers had already started. She could hear them. She could feel them. The weight of eyes that didn't adore her anymore, but dissected her, judging, knowing, seeing past the dress and the hair and the pretty little lies. And then came the final blow. He arrived late. Her lover. She hadn't expected him there, but I had. I invited him. Politely. Anonymously. Said the party would be a good place to talk. I saw his eyes scanning the crowd, confused by the tension. Then he saw her. Started toward her. She turned, eyes lighting up for half a second, until he pulled out his phone and showed her the same folder. Her smile died in real time. He leaned in, whispered something, then walked out. No drama. No explosion. Just cold exit. I watched her shoulders fall as she turned in slow circles, realizing no one was coming to help her. No one would stand beside her now. She finally came to me, mascara slightly smeared, voice low and dry. "You did this to humiliate me." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, you did this. I just gave it a stage." She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked around again, everyone pretending not to watch, but everyone watching. Her parents were by the fence, both of them silent, arms crossed. Her mother couldn't even meet her gaze. Her father looked at me, then nodded once, like a final verdict had been passed. She turned back to me, one last desperate attempt at control. "You think this makes you strong?" I didn't even blink. "No, it just makes me done." She shook her head, her face falling apart in pieces. Rage, panic, shame, disbelief. "You're sick," she spat. I tilted my head slightly. "No, I'm free." And then I did something she didn't expect. I stayed. I didn't storm off. I didn't make a grand exit. I picked up our daughter, held her close, and sat back down with her cousins. Laughing, smiling, surrounded by people who now knew the truth, and knew I never deserved what I got. While she stood there, trembling in a dress that now felt like a costume, surrounded by a crowd that once admired her and now looked right through her. She wanted to rewrite the story, but I made sure the ending was mine. The silence didn't last long. An hour after the moment, everything collapsed, when she stood there exposed in the middle of her own daughter's birthday party, trying to hold herself together with trembling hands and forced smiles. She finally snapped. It started with her marching back toward me, heels digging into the grass, eyes wild and wet with fury. "You wanted to ruin me," she hissed, loud enough for people nearby to stop mid-sentence. I turned to her slowly, still holding a paper cup of juice in my hand, our daughter playing behind me with her cousins. "You did that yourself," I said calmly, but she was past listening. Her voice rose, cracking, sharp as broken glass. "You planned this like some sociopath. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know, my family, my friends." People began to gather. Her parents were already on edge, standing behind her now, her mother nervously clutching a tissue, her father with his jaw clenched. One of her co-workers tried to step forward to say something, but she cut them off with a wave of her hand. "Don't you dare pretend to care now," she snapped. "You're all enjoying this, aren't you?" She turned back to me, voice shaking. You wanted to look like the hero, the poor victim. Well, congratulations. You made me the victim, I said coldly. I just stopped pretending I wasn't. She took a step closer, finger pointed in my face. You manipulated everyone. You twisted the truth. Her voice cracked, and I saw it. The edge, the unraveling. You knew how to make me look like the villain. You did that, I repeated, voice like steel. Every lie. Every night you disappeared. Every time you looked your daughter in the eyes and said, I love you, before crawling into someone else's bed. That hit like a slap, and she staggered back, her hands clenched into fists. You think you're some saint, she shouted. You think you're better than me? You were boring. Lifeless. You stopped being a husband a long time ago. A gasp came from behind her, her mother. I looked past her and saw the woman cover her mouth, eyes filling with disbelief. Enough, her father said suddenly, stepping forward. This isn't the time. But she ignored him, rage now spinning out of control. You turned our daughter's birthday into a courtroom, she shrieked. You used her. No. I snapped, my voice finally raised, not with anger, but weight. I protected her. From growing up thinking betrayal is normal. From believing love means turning a blind eye. I stood up for her. Something you forgot how to do. Her face twisted into something unfamiliar. She looked around, at the faces watching, the silence that had fallen. No one came to her side. Even the ones who were once her people now stood still, eyes down, ashamed to be part of her illusion. She turned back to me and said, quieter now, but full of venom, you'll regret this. You'll grow old alone. Cold. Empty. I took a step forward and said just loud enough for everyone to hear. I'd rather be alone with my integrity than live next to someone who treats loyalty like a disposable napkin. She lunged toward me then. Not to strike, not quite, but her hands pushed against my chest, trembling with the force of her frustration. I didn't move, didn't flinch. Her father stepped in, pulling her back, holding her shoulders. Enough, he said again, firm now. You did this. You own it. Then, from the side, a new voice broke through. I didn't know she was married. Everyone turned. It was him, her affair partner, standing near the gate, his voice low but clear. She told me they were separated. She said he was toxic. I had no idea. She froze. For a second, it looked like she'd collapse. Her legs wobbled. Her breath stuttered. You coward, she muttered. You're just trying to save yourself. But he didn't respond. He turned and walked away, just like he had after seeing the evidence. Quiet. Done. She looked around one last time. Nothing but silence. Stares. Not pity. Not support. Just distance. She stood in the middle of her own party, alone. Her daughter playing with cousins who now avoided her. Her parents at her back, ashamed. Her friends silent. Her lover gone. Her husband. No. Her ex, standing still, not needing to move, because she was already sinking. And then she broke. The rage melted into desperation. She looked at me with eyes wide, lips trembling. Please, she whispered. We can fix this. We can explain it to them. Just say it was a misunderstanding. We can go to therapy. We can. I raised my hand gently, palm open like a stop sign. It's over, I said. She took one final breath like she might still fight, might still scream, but there was nothing left. The performance was over. The curtain had dropped. The crowd had seen too much. She turned away slowly, one hand wiping her cheek, her steps uneven as she walked to the gate. No one followed. No one spoke. All that remained was the quiet rustle of wind, the laughter of children too young to understand, and the man who had refused to stay broken. Me. Everything she built turned to ash. The job was the first to go. Not with a scandal, not with a dramatic firing, just silence. Projects reassigned, meetings skipped, her name slowly erased from the email chains. HR called her in for a conversation, during which they politely explained that her recent personal matters were affecting the workplace environment, that there were concerns about her judgment, that perhaps it was time to explore other opportunities. 2 weeks later, she was out. No farewell party. No card. Just a cardboard box and the sound of the glass door clicking shut behind her. Her social media collapsed next. One by one, the likes disappeared. The comments dried up. Friends unfollowed. A few blocked her completely. Her best friend, once a constant presence in her posts, vanished. So did the colleagues, the cousins, even the yoga girls. No angry posts, no direct confrontations, just the coldest cut of all, indifference. Ghosted by a world she thought would rally to her side. In town, people no longer waved. The neighbor who used to bring over cookies for the holidays now crossed the street when she walked by. The woman at the grocery store stopped asking about her daughter. The cashier didn't look her in the eye. She stopped going outside before 10 p.m. The lover didn't last either. At first, he tried to play hero, offered a couch, a distraction. But he wasn't built for real damage. Once the reality hit, no more weekend getaways, no more stolen hours of fantasy, no more wife in name only to mock. He faded fast. One cold evening, after another one of her rants about how unfair life was, he stood, packed his bag, and said, "I didn't sign up to be your consequence." He walked out and never answered another message. She texted, called, begged. Silence. Her comfort had limits, and she had finally passed them. She left town within a month, moved to a small city where no one knew her name, took a job behind the counter at a cafe, pouring lattes for strangers who didn't judge her, not because they were kind, but because they didn't care. Her Instagram went dark. Her new address was never announced. Her world had shrunk to a studio apartment and a list of blocked contacts she now regretted burning. And then came the messages. At first, just one, "I miss you." I didn't answer. Then, "I still love you." Followed by, "I wish I could go back." And then finally, "Please, I just want to talk." That one I read twice. Not because I felt anything, but because I didn't. I responded with 6 words. "That's strange. I forgot your name." She called the next evening. I let it ring 5 times before picking up. She was crying. Her voice, once sharp and smug, was fragile now, hollow. "Please," she whispered, "can I just see you? Just once. I need to talk." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. She showed up the next day. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Her coat too big on her now. She looked like someone who had been left outside in the rain too long. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. She stood on the porch like a stray. "I'm sorry," she said, barely able to speak. "I know it doesn't matter anymore. I know I ruined everything, but I can't live with how it ended. I see your face every night. I remember how you looked at me, like you didn't even know me. And I get it now. I wouldn't know me either." I said nothing. Tears spilled down her face. "I don't want anything. I don't expect forgiveness. I need to know if there's even a small part of you that still feels something. Anything. I need to know if I meant something at all." I looked at her, and I saw nothing I once knew. Not the woman I married. Not the mother of my child. Not even the liar who ruined everything. Just a stranger. A hollow voice with familiar eyes, asking to be let back into a life she set on fire. I said, "You did mean something, but then you chose to mean something to someone else." She choked back a sob, shaking her head. "I didn't mean to." I stopped her. "Don't. You had time to mean it differently. Every time you lied, every time you left, every time you smiled and said you loved me while texting him. That was the meaning you gave it." Her shoulders dropped. She wiped her face with her sleeve. "I'm lost," she said. "I don't know who I am anymore." I stepped back into the doorway. "Then maybe it's time to find out. But not here. Not with me." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Like she already knew this was the end, but needed to hear it anyway. I looked at her one last time. And I asked, softly, the words that had burned in me since the day she broke it all. "And what would you have done in my place?" She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away.